Hello everyone and welcome to Virtual Tabletop Gaming Live and Tabletop Gaming Magazine. I'm Daniel Faulkner, designer at Wētā Workshop, and with me here today are...
I'm Ian Luxmore, the initial concept designer for the game. And
I'm Jarrett Gray. I jumped in and helped turn the initial design into this board game that we've got here.
Yeah, so we're here kind of representing a larger team that have worked on this game, but we're very, very proud of the outcome. And it's actually the first time that the three of us are all in the room talking about it together, so it's kind of an exciting time. I thought maybe we could start off the discussion. Ian, seeing as you were here at the very beginning, maybe we could talk a little bit about where the whole idea for the game came from.
Yeah, I got brought in to have a conversation with you guys around Boardgame with a mutual contact, Shem from Garfield. And we sat down and brainstormed. You guys were looking for a game that was kind of broader reach, fitted better in with this bigger thing after doing the follow-up from Giant Killer Robots, which was a big, chunky game, but really aimed at gamers. And this was looking at a game that was a broader reach and sort of engaged the wider public. And so we sat down and did a huge brainstorming session, you, myself, Paul, and Nicola early in the days, and came up with 100 different ideas of things that we could try in the Lord of the Rings universe. But the thing that really attracted us to this piece of the whole Lord of the Rings universe was that it was a little bit more lighthearted, a bit more family-like, and kind of a little departure from the typically sort of darker, grimmer nature of the stories. And that really appealed as a starting point for a game. And it had, for a relatively small scene, it had a lot of depth in terms of elements of the role of the Dwarves and Gandalf's plan to get Bilbo involved in a quest and to try and shake him out of his everyday life, and the chaos or supposed chaos that these Dwarves brought to the picture just got us smiling about the story. So I think, yeah, that was very much the kicking off point for this, is we keep circling back to the idea and it just stuck. It was a very natural one. It didn't actually take us very long to get to this as a...
No, yeah, I remember it was kind of everybody's favourite pretty early on. It's just that lighter spirit of fun, right? And, you know, the stakes aren't the end of the world. It's which they often are in Lord of the Rings games. And this is one of the things that I, as a Middle-earth fan, absolutely love about the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit is that world. You can have so much fun in it, and that you can tell those really big stories and those moments of heroism, that sort of stuff. But then you can also have fun in that world, and there are lighter moments and really, really playful moments, which is what we wanted to go for with this. So it's been fun, and it lent itself to kind of a lighter treatment as a result.
I think within The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, most board games that you see are often war games, big war games, and they're great games. I've played some awesome Lord of the Rings games, but it was really exciting to come onto a project which was like, we're going to present a really fun, like social, interesting family aspect of the, you know, they're at a feast, and but there's a story there. I think whenever I'm looking at designing games, I'm always looking for what's the story that people are going to play through, because I think it's really important to sort of know where you start and where you're going when you sit down to play a game. It's like, what are we trying to do here? It really helps people play it and enjoy it when they know what they're trying to do. So I think there was just that idea and the concept of this party that Bilbo was not expecting to have is, and you know, the Dwarves, how they play into that, they want a feast and they want to bring him into almost their culture. How that plays out is just a really nice hook for gamers to sit down to, I think. Yeah.
I guess that's how they express their affection for him too, is kind of by joshing with him. You know, it's almost like a friend of mine described that scene in the movie as almost like a sports team on tour. You know, and they all love each other, but they give each other heaps as well. And you know, you're one of the gang when they're giving you heaps. So.
Yeah. Well, I also one of the things that I find about Bilbo's journey, and this is the beginning of it, is when you get to Lord of the Rings and he's having his birthday, it's this huge party and he knows how to throw a party. But here, he's a bit of a recluse and he doesn't know how to throw a party. He doesn't even really invite guests into his home. And so when the dwarves come, he's got all the stuff. He can do anything he wants. He could have like a big party, but he doesn't know how to. And the dwarves, admittedly, they try and do it in a very dwarven way, and he gets a bit upset about it. But they're trying to show him like a bigger, more fun way of engaging with people, I think. And that's sort of the beginning of like, he changes a lot through The Hobbit. And you kind of see the culmination of that change at the start of Lord of the Rings. But he's just an interesting character, and I think this is the really cool starting point for him.
And it's Gandalf that's kind of orchestrated that too, because he sees the potential of who Bilbo could be, right? So he staged this kind of rather abrupt intervention, by bringing 13 dwarves to Bilbo's house.
I think there's a real element in the story, both actually at the start of both Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, of the rest of the world coming to Hobbiton.
Right.
And there isn't the rest of the world for most of their life. It's quite insular, and so the dwarven culture is a whole new culture arriving in Hobbiton that's it's different. It's not the way they do things.
So in the game, we play the dwarves coming in, right? Like, so the Bilbo's a character in the game, but really the fun that we have as players is taking control of different dwarves and bringing them in and shaking Bilbo up a little bit in a nice way. So it's. Do you guys want to talk about that balance and how the dwarves play with Bilbo?
Like when I came on, one of the mechanics that people really seemed to like from the original design was the curious and furious tokens that we had, where Bilbo would run around and he'd get more and more curious and then a bit furious with what the dwarves were doing, and it seemed really thematic with the scene. So I thought that was one of the really strong parts that we wanted to keep and just explore how we could change the card game that we sort of started with into a board game that kept like all of these cool mechanics where Bilbo was curious and furious and the dwarves were changing and like running around Bag End kind of frenetically, but also just in a fun sort of social way.
Yeah, the curious furious thing was kind of almost just came about because of the rhyming of the two words, and I originally had drawn down a little track where you'd get some token of some description every time the dwarves did something. And I was sort of figuring there should be a tipping point at some point when things start going from having aroused his attention to him going, what's going on, to I don't like this. And you can even see it in the movie and the books. He starts to get angry at them because he doesn't understand what's going on. But initially he's just, oh, you're here. And I initially just had a track that was, once you've got so many tokens, he becomes furious. Being the point of getting him really angry was never the goal. So if he gets too furious, it's a failing on the part of the dwarves, because now he's just going to shut down or something bad will happen. Whereas his curiosity was really the driving point. I realized I'd written down curious and furious, and as soon as I read those two words, a light went off that was such a natural combination of things, and not too many games where that would make sense, but in this particular context, it was kind of perfect. And
everybody loved it when you came in with that. It was one of those aha moments in the room where we realized, yes, that's the thing.
It was that and the song, I think, initially got everyone's attention, because I think from the original brief, no one expected the song to come into it, and it was just kind of, I was fishing around for a concept that gave the dwarf something to aim towards, because it had to be more than just getting him curious to make it thematic. And really the whole core of this scene is the song. It describes the whole thing of doing all these things but not really doing them, and he thinks you're doing them and he's worried about it, but it's not quite happening. And so once I did that and just made cards that were themed around the song, I think those two things were what really made it feel like there was a game here that was fun, rather than or there was something to this right at the start, I think.
Yeah, and I think that those two things kind of really emulate the actual movie. Like just going and watching the scene again, or even reading it in a book, and the song, the way you read it is like, it feels like they're kind of ribbing Bilbo at first, but when you actually sort of look at it properly and listen to it properly, what they're doing is they're just talking about all of the things that Bilbo really doesn't like in his house, because it's his house, it's his home, and these are the things that we shouldn't do. So in the movie, he gets really, really angry when they start trying to clean up, and he's like, they're throwing plates everywhere, and but they've kind of got it all under control. They actually managed to clean up the entire place. They've had this big feast, they've made a mess, they clean it all up, they make it perfect, and they never break a dish.
Yeah.
So they're trying to just open him up. They want him to be like, look, there's more to the world than sitting inside your house. Come out and enjoy it with us. Like, we want to be your friend, and we don't know you, you don't know us, but let's try and make something happen. And yeah, I think the idea of Bilbo getting furious and then the dwarf saying, oh, yep, sorry, okay, I'll go sit down, maybe someone else can have a go. I think that really plays into that. It's pretty fun.
That being part of the game where you kind of take your dwarf through, and then as he's kind of getting towards the end of his little journey with the Bilbo, you bring another dwarf in, right? You sit them down at the table, and it goes. And that's one of the other things I really love that you guys together kind of came up with, which is that each of the dwarves plays a little bit differently. It's not just the same actions you're taking; that it reflects the personality of each of the little dwarves. And that was something when we were working on the movie with Peter Jackson. He was adamant was we can't just have 13 characters that are essentially clones of each other. They each need to be distinctive. They each need to have their own look. They each need to have their own characters and personalities, so that we get to know them in the course of the 3 movies, but also in the game, you get a little sense of the differences between them, both visually and then in the way they play as well, which is really fun.
Yeah, well, it was very natural early on in the game because you gave me that crib sheet that had all the...
the dwarf cheat sheet.
Yeah, the cheat sheet had their characteristics, and even the colour associated with them, and it almost meant they were pre-made characters anyway, and it's standard gaming design now to have differential powers and characters, and in a game where you can switch from one to another, it was kind of cool to have that. It made you look forward to the next dwarf arriving at the door, and I think that was what led to the mechanic of not using more than one dwarf. Is that the whole stream of the scene is dwarves arriving one after the other. The chaos build. It's only 1 or 2 to start with, and you lose track of some of them during the story, and you don't quite know what they're up to. And I think that was, in some ways, the initial design for the game almost wrote itself off the scene, and the material, which I was privileged to have access to. Was very cool.
Of course, it all ends when Thorin turns up too, right? So again, we kind of took that cue from the books and the movies that he's the guy who is just serious. It's like, okay, playtime's over, Thorin's here, down to business kind of thing.
That's when the darker tone starts in the movie too, and that's sort of a natural point to say, okay, we've done with the fun part.
Yeah.
Now things are serious.
But it also puts a clock on the game, which is quite nice. So, you've got to achieve this before the boss arrives.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the tricky things to balance in the game was you didn't necessarily want the game to always finish by having the song finish or always finish by having Thorin. Either of the 2 end goals, they could end the game, and you wanted that to be balanced quite well. So I think with the idea of the Curious and Furious, which forces dwarves to have to sit down and bring in another dwarf, that actually helps. When we were playtesting, we would have people try desperately to hold on to one dwarf the whole time, and you can do that. And I tried to add in some card elements that would make it more possible to do that, and even some mechanics where you'd be rewarded for doing that or rewarded for not doing that. Like you could kind of go either path, but that the idea that the dwarfs kind of slowly come in and eventually Thorin's at the bottom of that deck, it's like, can you get the song done before Thorin comes in? And I've actually even seen people, even though it's a competitive game, play it cooperatively to try and complete the song before Thorin comes.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool. I hadn't seen that.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah. One of my good friends came up to me and said, "Oh, is there actually going to be a co-op version for this?" Well, not really, but
Yeah.
But the fact that they tried to complete the song together, and they'd almost help each other a little bit to try and complete the song before Thorin showed up, and I think that's cool. There's always different ways to play games, and I think that's an exciting part of this as well. Even though theoretically you're actually competing, maybe you're not really, and and I guess that's the essence of family games too, right? You want them to feel like, hey, everyone had a good time, like the fun and the enjoying it together is what matters. So
I think there's a lot to be said for a game with a strong theme where you can enjoy having told the story without having to care about the score.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the score matters, it's what drives your actions, but to be able to go, I came dead last, but that was a blast.
Yeah.
Like that's a sign of a good game to me. There's lots of games I enjoy where coming last doesn't bother me in the slightest. It's usually a sign of my favourite type of game.
It also kind of reflects the dynamic of the family, and I kind of think that's part of what the dwarves are. They are a family. I mean, literally they're a family. Some of them, you know, there are cousins and brothers and stuff in the game, but they kind of behave that way in a sense too, where they have each other's backs, they work as a really tight unit, but they are also competitive with each other in a friendly way.
Yeah, and I mean that's something that's a really strong theme throughout the movie, especially, you know, in the books as well. But the dwarves. You know, they're tight, but they're competitive. They get cross with each other like any other family, but they're all driving for the same end goal.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
And you have Gandalf as sort of the moderating influence, overseeing it all, sort of weaving through it all, keeping it all under control. One of the most fun things for me, working on the visuals of the game, was coming up with the game board. And so that was based very, very closely on the actual layout of the sets for Bag End, and obviously you guys had devised which were sort of the active rooms that we were going to spend time in. So we modified it slightly in that we introduced a few areas that we don't see in the movies to it, but for the most part the layout is pretty much reflective of what the sets were and what we saw in the film, just given sort of a stylistic tweak, which was really fun. Speaking of the style, the inspiration for that and the sort of playful, slightly cartoony look to the whole thing was the mini epics, which my good friend and colleague Mauro Santini designed. And that's what these are right here, and you can see some of them on the table there too, which are these kind of really, really cool vinyl collectibles with a sort of slightly cartoony aesthetic. You know, I've been spending my professional career 20 plus years now in Middle-earth, which has been great fun, and most of that has been obviously on the more serious side of Lord of the Rings, but it's been great to have a little bit of fun and play with kind of the slightly goofier side of it as well. And so that was sort of a natural fit for the family-friendly, fun, colourful flavour of the game, was to fold in the same style of character design that Mauro had established with these collectibles in the game itself.
Yeah, it was just at the start of the design process, once we'd picked this theme, that they were getting released out into the wild. So the timing was kind of perfect, because once we took one look at them and it was just obvious that was the style for a family-based game in this universe, it was almost too good to be true in terms of timing.
It certainly made working on the prototypes and using lots of the art that you had, you know, really rewarding, because you could create like something pretty quickly with the assets that were already there, get it printed off, and people would enjoy playing it. And I remember the first time I saw the board, it was that you had put together just the line drawing of the board, and I was just like, yep, this is exactly what I wanted.
Oh, cool.
Like, it was like just perfect. And yeah, we've managed to create like a lot of chaos in the space, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, it's really cluttered, but that was the aesthetic that Peter Jackson kind of drove in the movie, was that Bag End should just look like this wonderful, cozy clutter. So we tried to bring that to the game board as well, while having also clearly delineated functional areas, which our graphic design team, thank goodness, were able to help us sort of pull out and make clear, so that it doesn't just become visually overloading. So you can tell, you know, what you need to do in the different spaces. The icons certainly help with that as well. And then running around the side of the board, you've got the song verses that you as players have to fill in. So we've got it all set up. I feel like I want to have a game. So that's what I would do next if we had the time, jump in and do it. But for now, I guess that's probably it for us, eh? Shall we probably say goodbye to everybody? Thanks for hanging with us.
Yeah.
And if you want to go check it out, check out The Hobbit, an Unexpected Party board game.